Hello and welcome back again to that Tracks F1 podcast. I'm your host Jodie, and it's absolutely great to have you here with me for our review of the 2026 Monaco Grand Prix. Monaco can be a bit of a mixed bag. It can be processional, and I did think after the initial early drama of the race, we were going to settle into just that procession again. But things got a little bit more interesting towards the end. But anyway, there's lots and lots to discuss from the entire weekend. But before we start getting into all of that, could I ask that you give us a like or a subscribe? I know you're bored of hearing me ask, but honestly, I can't stress to you how much it does help me out. If you could give us a like, a subscribe, a review, pop over onto our social media. The links for those will be in the show notes. And just give us a little like or give us a little comment, a little bit of feedback. Follow us, subscribe, anything you can do just to help me out will be absolutely appreciated beyond words. Thanks very much. So this weekend got underway with free practice 1. Pretty much straight away in FP1, we had Charles Leclerc going down an escape road. I noticed both the Racing Bulls complaining about a lack of steering at the hairpin. Both of the Racing Bulls looked like they had the turning circle of a Sherman tank, to be honest. Leclerc didn't look like he was having a very fun time in this session. Everything looked a little bit of a struggle. There was also a little bit of friction between the Haas boys. Ocon complained that Behrman had messed up both of his fast laps. Behrman felt that Ocon nearly ran into him from behind and called Ocon an idiot. So I think there was a little bit of friction between them this weekend, and things were going reasonably well until poor Isaac Hadjar went into the wall on the exit of the swimming pool chicane. And the only other thing of note was a few minutes from the end of the session, Alonso clipped the wall, sustained some damage, and that was the end of his session. Now, in FP2, everything seems to be going perfectly fine. With 42 minutes left to go, Nouvelle Chicane, we see Lando Norris go down the runoff, which brought out a yellow flag. Now, I want to talk about this little incident quite a bit because quite clearly Lando had lost all electrics to his car. And I saw 4 or 5 marshals go out to the car. Lando was out of the car, and the marshals tried to wheel the car further up the escape road. Now, bear in mind at this point, these marshals have their back to oncoming traffic. Oncoming traffic is under yellow, so should slow, but they are still in quite a vulnerable position because one of the old adages that I was always taught at marshalling is if one car can get there, so can another. So whenever you're dealing with an incident of any kind, you have to be very, very aware that something else could come off. So it's more ideal to try and keep an eye on what's going on behind you. Now, these marshals that had their back to the oncoming traffic, which, as I say, would have been slower under yellows, would rely on their fellow marshals to keep an eye out for them to some degree. And they are in a runoff area, so it's not like they're quite on the edge of the track. But I was watching and I was thinking, this is really, really strange because they're trying to move Norris's car and it's not going anywhere because it's clearly in gear. Now, one of the first things you get taught as a marshal is about, you can sometimes see them. You'll see there's a big letter N and a big letter E on somewhere on race cars, and you will see them on the F1 cars. You may have noticed them yourself. You may know what they are. You may have wondered what they are. Now, your big letter E, that sometimes, depending on the kind of race car, is a push button or a lever pull, and that detonates the internal fire extinguisher, which, as you can imagine, is very, very useful. Drivers don't like it if you pull it without really, really good reason, though, because it's very expensive to refill. But I digress. The N button is the button that you push that puts the car in neutral. Even if the car's electrics have gone, like Norris's had, the neutral, in simple terms, the neutral button runs on a different system. So you can press that neutral button and it engages neutral. It puts the car in neutral so you can move it. And I was really, really puzzled because I was like, there are like 4 or 5 marshals trying to move this car. Has nobody thought to press the neutral button? And I'm thinking that just doesn't make sense. I'm quite sure that Monaco marshals are trained to a level that they know what they're doing. And it's kind of like marshalling 101. You push the neutral button so you can move the car. So obviously we see another couple of marshals come and and try and get this car moved, and then one turns up with like a little dolly thing on wheels, and they kind of put the car on that and take it away. I kind of didn't want to do my fellow marshals down because I could not believe that all these marshals would come out to this car and not know to press the neutral button. So I knew there must be something wrong. And then obviously it came to light afterwards that, and in fact McLaren got fined €30,000 for this. They had put tape over the neutral button. Now, I've seen a lot of things on social media about people saying, oh, €30,000 for sticking a bit of tape over a neutral button. That's really too much. That's not such a big deal. And I don't blame people for thinking like that because they probably don't realise. But for those marshals out there who then couldn't deploy the neutral button, they couldn't depress it, that put them massively at risk because they were at the side of the track for far longer than they needed to be in order to move Norris's car. Because in an ideal world as a marshal, you want to be out and doing your job and back behind the Armco, behind the catchment fencing as fast as you possibly can. So they were out there for an extended period of time, which they shouldn't have had to have been. And it physically made the job harder, not just longer, but it physically made the job harder. So it's really, really inconvenient. And the other thing is that there are two lights that sit either side of this neutral button, and one of those lights is to warn marshals or anybody else that comes into contact with the car as to whether it should not be touched because it's not electrically safe. And that light will flash red if that car is not electrically safe for anybody to touch. And I've heard conflicting reports. Some reports say that they just had some kind of tape over this button and the lights, and some say it was transparent tape, which I suppose is marginally better. So if this light was flashing red, at least the marshals could have seen it if that was the case. If it wasn't the case, then they absolutely deserve a €30,000 fine because they are literally putting people's lives at danger. And don't forget, marshals are volunteers. Nobody's paying anybody to do this. We marshals do it for the love of the sport. So I'm really disappointed in McLaren. Apparently, the reasoning behind it was something to do with the aero on the car. And as an ordinary person, I cannot possibly see how sticking tape over that was going to help the aero in any way. There probably was some minute advantage to be gained, but it's unacceptable to put other people in harm's way for something like that. Those rules and regulations exist for a reason. And as I say, I'm really, really disappointed in McLaren for that one. So there we go. That's me on my soapbox. I've said my piece. So FP2 from that point was reasonably unremarkable until about 17 minutes to go when Colapinto went into the wall at Saint-Devote and managed to clip both the front and rear, damaging the suspension of both. And then with 5 minutes to go, Perez had a brake fire, quite a bad one actually, and that did bring out a red flag. And then we were left with about a minute and a half of free practice 2. Now, free practice 3, Antonelli had a bit of a moment when he ran over the curb at Nouvelle Chicane, but held it. Then Bottas had a brake fire, so there's definitely something going on there, isn't there, with the Cadillacs and the brake cooling. But we had a few little incidents in FP3. Albon went down the escape road at Saint-Devote at one point. Lawson had a bit of a double near miss, hit a bump somewhere on the track twice in quick succession, but managed to hold it, which was quite impressive. Then Colapinto had a spin at the hairpin. And then Behrman had quite a big off at Massenet where he hit the wall. So it was again another bad day for Ollie Behrman, whose season seems to have really taken a big turn for the worst. My takeaways from FP3 and just general free practice in general was that Hülkenberg and Bortoleto were going really, really well. And I have to say, Audi, that I far, far prefer your livery with that yellow than the orange. I was not a fan of the Audi livery when it was revealed. I didn't like the blocky look of it. I just thought it was a little bit harsh. And I still argue that kind of a fade from the chromey, silvery into the orange would look better rather than that block line. But I definitely think it looked much better with the yellow. I just think it lifted it ever such a lot. So at the end of FP1, we had Leclerc topping the timings with Hamilton and Verstappen behind. The end of FP2, Hamilton topped the timings with Verstappen and Russell behind. And at the end of FP3, Antonelli topped the timings with Leclerc and Hamilton behind. I think the surprise of all three sessions for me was how well Verstappen showed up. I must admit that Max had very much flown under my radar this weekend when making predictions. I didn't really expect anything great from the Red Bulls this weekend. So yes, quite surprised to see that. And then qualifying was underway, and it wasn't long before poor old Gabriel Bortoleto clipped the barrier on the way into the Nouvelle Chicane, broke his suspension and ended up in the wall. And that brought out the red flag. And that really was a shame for him because I felt like he was slowly building up to stringing together a really, really good weekend. Sainz posted a bit of a belter towards the end of Quali 1, where he went from 19th to 10th and dragged himself out of the relegation zone. So that was good to see. And the drivers that we lost in Quali 1 were qualifying 22nd was Lance Stroll and 21st was Alonso. an absolute shame. Really, really thought that Monaco could potentially be somewhere where the Aston Martins could play to their strengths. At 20th, we had Bottas. 19th was Behrman, which again, just a shocking weekend again for Behrman. His season really has, the wheels have fallen off it quite a bit at the moment, so we're really hoping for a big recovery for Behrman. Then in 18th, we had Sergio Perez, and 17th was Esteban Ocon. Quali 2 got underway. One of the notable things for me in Quali 2 was how quite closely matched the Williams were and how well the Williams went. So that was really encouraging to see them pop it into 11th and 12th. And it was the other way around this time. Normally Sainz beats Albon in qualifying, but it was actually Albon that took the 11th place. So in Quali 2, we lost Bortoleto, who's qualified 16th. Lindblad qualified 15th. I really do need to see him rekindle that early showing that he had in Australia where he finished in the points. So I was quite sad to see Lindblad down in 15th and also sad to see Colapinto in 14th after a couple of races where he really showed up and showed what he could do. 13th was Hulkenberg and then Sainz in 12th and Albon 11th. So then it came down to Quali 3. And with 8 minutes to go in Quali 3, Hamilton had taken provisional pole, which was quite exciting. I think everybody's expecting the hometown hero, Charles Leclerc, to do well here. But I think Hamilton has shown that he can really take that fight to Charles this weekend. 30 seconds later, Antonelli crosses the line to take provisional pole, and then it looked like Max was actually going to come and steal that pole from Kimi, and I was very, very surprised. As I've said, was not expecting great things from Verstappen this weekend, but sadly for him, he actually lost out on pinching pole there by 1/1000th of a second. Now, bearing in mind how fast Kimi has been, that's really quite impressive from Max. Leclerc's issues were continuing. In the first sector, he went wide on entry into Messina, but he did go on to take provisional pole with just over a minute left of the session. So the checkered flag came down on the session, but there were several drivers still on a hot lap. And with the timer at 0, Verstappen took pole. And I did actually think Verstappen had done it on this occasion. But then Antonelli crossed the line and just poached it back from Verstappen. It did look like Leclerc might be able to put in a last-ditch challenge, but unfortunately he lost the rear at Tabak and got a puncture. So it was Kimi on pole. So the top 10 then were qualifying 10th was Liam Lawson. In 9th was Gasly, which just goes to show that the Alpine was capable of a little bit more this weekend. So it was really disappointing to see Colapinto in 14th. 8th was Norris, who abandoned his last flying lap. 7th, Piastri. 6th was George Russell. Now, he again seemed to be struggling, not comfortable with the car, just didn't quite seem to be able to get the best out of it, and qualified 6th. Hadjar qualified a very impressive 5th, which just goes to show how on it this weekend the Red Bulls were. Leclerc took 4th, Hamilton qualified 3rd, Verstappen 2nd, and Antonelli gets yet another pole. So yes, I was quite surprised. The top 10 for me just generally was quite surprising. Quite disappointing showing by the McLarens. And of the two Ferraris, I thought that Leclerc would outstrip Hamilton this weekend, and it was the other way around. Definitely wasn't expecting another Antonelli pole. Well, on Sunday, the race got underway. I don't think any of us really have very high expectations of the Monaco race, do we? Everything's really always seems to be decided on qualifying day, but we certainly had a little bit of an unusual start. Apparently, Verstappen was reporting some issues on the formation lap, and when the lights went out, despite initially moving forward, Verstappen's car soon ground to a halt, which was a real shame. I mean, he was starting on the front row alongside Antonelli. Yes, he was slightly disadvantaged in that qualifying second puts you on the outside going into the corner. But I really was looking forward to seeing what would happen at that first corner because Verstappen was definitely on a flyer this weekend and Kimi just seems to be permanently on a flyer. So I was really looking forward to seeing who would come out of that, whether one of them would, both of them would, or neither of them would. And we were really robbed of that, which was a real shame because it would have been interesting to see what Max could do this weekend up against Kimi because Kimi does look a little bit unstoppable at the moment. But Antonelli gets away. And everybody else did really, really well, actually, to avoid Max coming off of the line. And during that first lap, the two McLarens almost have contact. And that means Norris backs off and Gasly gets by. Behrman has contact with Ocon, and I'm sure that's going to do nothing to solve the arguments that seem to have been simmering. Well, I can't even say under the surface, really. There does definitely seem to be a bit of a breakdown in team relations between the two drivers there, and that certainly won't have helped. So he's in after lap 1, and poor Gabby Bortoletto, he's in after lap 1 as well to take off the softs and put on the hards. He'd actually had to start from the pit lane due to further reliability problems with the car. And looking at where Bortoletto finished the race, which was actually 11th, I think that's a real shame to be one place outside of the points. And I do have a feeling that had he started where he qualified rather than from the pit lane, he would have definitely finished in the points, which would have been a real boost for him. Bottas then retires on lap 18 with further overheating issues for the Cadillac. They've definitely had a lot of issues with that this weekend. On lap 19, Hadjar complains that there's something wrong. The first gear is not usable on the car. The team tell him that there is no current fix to just get his head down. So I must admit, at that point, I was expecting Hadjar to not finish the race. Lap 26, Russell tries to get past Hadjar for 4th. Hadjar cuts the chicane. And then poor old Behrman retires his car on lap 32. He really has had the most appalling luck. Now on lap 33, Russell manages to get past Hadjar by undercutting in the pits, and then Antonelli pits on lap 38. And then begins the speeding in the pit lane penalty fiasco, where Russell gets a 5-second penalty for speeding in the pit lane. On lap 43, Russell complains that Norris is backing him up, which he is. He's trying to give Piastri room to have a pit stop without losing a place. However, this doesn't really last for very long, as yet again, Norris's car dies. So that is a retirement from Canada for Norris because the car gave up. Norris's car also gave up in free practice in Monaco, and then has given up also in the race. And I can't blame Norris if he's feeling really, really despondent, because I think to win a championship and then come back the following year, if you can't quite cut the mustard, if you're not quite as good as the other guy, that's one thing. But I don't know if anybody's noticed, but Norris has actually driven, when he's had chance, when his car has been going, has driven extremely well this year. So for him to lose a chance to defend his championship because the car is not up to scratch, I think is a real shame. And I think it's a shame for us as viewers because Antonelli seems to be romping away here. George hasn't got any answer for him at the moment. The Ferrari's big advantage was their mega starts. And although Ferrari are keeping up quite well, Lewis is now sitting second in the championship behind Antonelli, which is absolutely brilliant. They're not catching them. And I think we really needed to have the McLarens in there and the Red Bulls in there. I would have liked to have seen more people at the front taking it to the Mercedes, but at the minute, it's just not happening. Now, on lap 49, we had an absolutely mega move by Arvid Lindblad, who got past Albon. We don't see many overtakes in Monaco, so for Lindblad to pull that move was very gutsy and very entertaining, and I'm fully here for it. I loved that. And that took Lindblad into 10th place and actually into the points. Now, Piastri does do his stop, but obviously Hadjar gets through on him because Norris is not able to hold him up anymore because his car has died, as I've said. Sainz holds up Hulkenberg so that Albon can pit and come out in front. And then on lap 55, we find out that Piastri has got a speeding in the pit lane penalty. Now, on lap 60, there's suddenly a yellow flag, and we find out that Lance Stroll has gone straight on at the last corner into the barriers, which is not altogether unusual for Lance Stroll in Monaco. However, I will say in his defence that last year, which was even more processional than this year, Lance was the only one that actually did a really good, exciting overtaking move at Monaco, and he nailed it to absolute perfection. So I'm just going to soften the blow there a little bit before we all go, oh, look at that, Stroll's in the wall at Monaco again. But it did actually turn out to not be his fault. The road surface, the surface of the road had broken up on the corner, and it had created such a lot of marbles that these all stuck to Lance's front left tyre. So when he braked, the car just wouldn't turn. The marbles caused him to go straight into the barrier. So then this brings out a safety car. Lewis Hamilton boxes, then Leclerc boxes. Antonelli comes in for fresh tyres as well. And for a split second there, we thought, oh no, because the left back tyre did seem to stick a little bit. But really, it was only a matter of a couple of seconds, and he'd built up such a lead by then, it really didn't matter. Russell is waiting behind him as they have to do a double stack. Now, Hamilton saves his 5-second penalty for speeding in the pit lane when he comes in, when he boxes for tyres, but Russell didn't save his. Now, apparently, the crew were not expecting Russell to come in for fresh tyres. He was told to stay out, and Russell came in. That's what I've read. So perhaps the team were caught a little bit unawares, forgot about the penalty, forgot not to touch the car. You do actually see one member of the crew hesitate, and then everybody else goes for it, so he or she follows suit. Russell's then leaves the pit lane, having not served his 5-second penalty. Now, we're still under safety cars, so all of the lap cars can now unlap themselves. So that was basically everything up to the Ferraris. Now, because Russell hasn't served this penalty, that's seen as gaining an advantage, so he gets a second penalty of a drive-through for not serving his first penalty. Now, the safety car comes in on lap 65, and almost immediately a yellow flag is thrown. And there is poor old Charles Leclerc in the wall in exactly the same spot that Lance Stroll went into the wall. Historically, I do think that Leclerc does have a little bit of an issue with sometimes spinning on things that aren't really there. We've definitely seen that this year. He also does have a little bit of a history with crashing into barriers. It just seems to be a little Achilles heel for him. But the one thing I will say about Charles Leclerc is he always takes responsibility. I mean, we all know the famous quote, don't we? The I am stupid, because he will always hold his hands up if it's his fault. And he was absolutely adamant from the word go. He said, I'm not taking the blame for this. This was the brakes. Now, whether he feels differently about that now, realising in retrospect what happened to Lance Stroll before him, and when he realised how broken up the surface of the road was and that he got on the marbles, I don't know. But he very much knew at that point that it wasn't his fault. I was definitely inclined to believe him because he is a driver. He's never a driver who passes the buck or tries to shake off the blame or who can't say, sorry, that was my fault. He's always been very upfront when he has made a mistake. Leclerc's crash obviously brings out another safety car on lap 66. That then changes to a red flag. And when it's looked at, there is 3 to 4 metres of really broken up tarmac quite close to the racing line. Now, the marshals do the best to sweep up the debris, get rid of the marbles, but there's nothing you can really do with the broken tarmac at this point, which is less than ideal. So then we are back under safety car, and on lap 69, Russell complains that Hadjar's leaving far too big a gap under the safety car. Then a restart is called for the race, and I didn't know whether they were going to do a rolling start or a standing start. I was hoping for a standing start, and indeed, that is actually what happened. So we had a restart for the race, and for a split second, I actually thought Hamilton was going to catch up with Kimi Antonelli. He seemed to get an absolutely brilliant start, but Antonelli was just quicker, and he was away again. Now, further down the pack, George Russell really holds up the rest of the pack behind him. He's clearly really crawling around the hairpin, and this I can only assume is so that he can build up a bit of space, give himself a bit of space and a bit of a buffer to save his drive-through penalty. Unfortunately, this causes such a concertina effect behind him, and everybody's like packed in really close, like going 3 abreast into this hairpin, and it causes absolute mayhem. Hülkenberg sees a tiny gap, tries to go for it, really doesn't have room to do anything else other than go for it, accidentally tags Sainz. Sainz then gets tagged again also by Colapinto, but it puts Sainz out of the race, which was an absolute desperate shame because poor old Carlos always goes really well here. I'm fairly certain that he always finishes in the points at Monaco, which has completely ruined that now. And Hülkenberg ended up getting a 10-second penalty for causing a collision with Sainz, which I felt was a little bit heavy-handed. Maybe the stewards looked at it that with everybody so tightly packed, you maybe should have held off on thinking about diving past anybody. But really, there was nowhere else I could see that Hülkenberg was going to go. To me, it looked more of a racing incident, but if you're going to point the finger or blame at anybody, I think I would have pointed it at Russell because he'd backed the pack up to such a ridiculous degree. And yet Russell seemed to get away with this completely unscathed, and poor Hülkenberg got a 10-second penalty, which, to my way of thinking, was very harsh. Now, lap 75, Russell pits to save his drive-through penalty, and he's now out of the points. That's Russell's day done. This is Russell finishing another race with 0 points, while Kimi takes the win, which is exactly what George said he didn't want before Canada. It happened in Canada. It's happened again here. But you can't take anything away from Kimi. He goes on to win and scores some people call it a Grand Slam. Technically speaking, it's a Grand Chelem, which is he had pole in the race, he led all the laps, and he wins. And this is his 5th win in a row out of 6 races. So we really can't take anything away from Kimi. I think in some of the past races, we've been able to say, well, he's done really well. Shame he made this mistake, or shame he didn't get away quite so well. And really not to buckle under that pressure. You know, he had the original start to deal with. He had safety car restarts to deal with. He had another full standing start to deal with. And I did think when it came to that second restart of the race that they've all gotten out of the car. it's kind of like a reset, and I thought, will it get to you? You've got Lewis Hamilton sitting behind you who wants this win so badly. Will he maybe not get away cleanly? Will he just make a mistake under pressure? And hats off to him, he absolutely didn't put a foot wrong. He drove the race perfectly to a very well-deserved win. So the finishing order then was Antonelli obviously took the win, Hamilton an absolutely brilliant second. Can't take anything away from Hamilton on that one. He drove an excellent race. Hadjar took third, Piastri fourth, Lawson fifth with Lindblad sixth. What a day for racing bulls. Absolutely fantastic day. Gasly seventh, and I'm going to come back to this about Gasly finishing seventh. Albon in eighth, Ocon in a very respectable ninth, and then originally on the road, Perez finished 10th to give Cadillac its first points, but after penalties were applied, it was actually Alonso that finished 10th, giving Aston Martin their first point of the season. Now, I said I'd come back to this Gasly finishing seventh. I don't know if any of you've seen the footage. If you haven't, go and have a look. But be warned, it might tug at your heartstrings a little bit if you like Gasly. I really like Gasly. I think he's fantastic. So I thought it was quite sad to see. Gasly finished third on the road and thought he'd got the podium. Bless him, he celebrated all the way around the cool-down lap after the race. Waved to the crowd, waved to the marshals, was on the radio saying how excited he was to, podium at Monaco. He was absolutely delighted, and nobody at that team told him that, now, actually, you haven't come third. And no, it may be at that point that they weren't sure when it came to applying the penalties. I think they should have been, but I don't know the circumstances, so I'm not going to criticise anybody there. But yeah, absolute heartbreak for Gasly, and he has spoken since and said that he was literally heartbroken because he thought he'd got on the podium at Monaco. And the reason he didn't was that he had 2 speeding in the pit lane penalties at 5 seconds apiece to apply to his time, and that took him from third all the way down to 7th. Now, I'm sure it didn't escape anybody's attention that there seemed to be an awful lot of penalties handed out this weekend for speeding in the pit lane, giving them out like sweeties there were. And I've actually got in front of me a list of all the penalties. Sergio Perez had a false start and got a drive-through for that, and then was out of position at the restart after the red flag and got a 10-second penalty for that. So poor old Perez put in all that work and finished 10th on the road to give Cadillac the first point and then got it taken away from him. Hamilton got a speeding in the pit lane 5-second penalty. Russell got a speeding in the pit lane 5-second penalty, which, as we know, he failed to serve, so then ended up with a drive-through penalty. Gasly, as I've said, got 2 speeding in the pit lane penalties at 5 seconds apiece. Colapinto got a speeding in the pit lane penalty of 5 seconds. Piastri got speeding in the pit lane penalty of 5 seconds. Stroll got a 5-second penalty for exceeding track limits. I've not been able to find anything online to tell me where exactly he exceeded track limits, but I find that fascinating because normally at Monaco, if you exceed the track limits, you're out because you're in the wall. There's not really a lot that you can apply exceeding track limits to. But anyway, and then Hülkenberg, I've touched on, for his collision with Sainz, he got a 10-second penalty. So as I say, lots and lots of speeding in the pit lane penalties, to the point where I assumed that there was something wrong, that there was a sensor that was wrong somewhere. And I was thinking during the race, what are they going to do about this? Because it cannot be that all of these cars are speeding in the pit lane. You hit the pit lane limiter the second you cross that line, and it immediately reduces the car down to the speed it needs to be at. I think it's quite, because the speed limit is 60 kilometres an hour, and I think it's quite common to set the limiter at 59.5 just to be on the safe side. And there was a whole lot of drivers that got penalties because they were 0.1 kilometres an hour over the 60. Now, Alpine have actually asked for a right to review from the FIA. They are not happy about Gasly's speeding in the pit lane penalties because and obviously he lost his third place because of them. And they argued that Gasly's pit lane limiter was set to 59.5 kilometres an hour and that they've checked the onboard data and there is absolutely no point whatsoever that Gasly went above the 60 kilometres an hour. Now, you'd think that was a slam dunk, wouldn't you? You would absolutely think that that meant that something would have to be done about that. However, I've looked into this a little bit because, as I say, during the race, I assumed that it was some kind of faulty sensor. So the FIA system calculates an average speed. It has several checkpoints in the pit lane for the cars to pass, and it makes a calculation based on how quickly you should pass each camera, and that's all added together. And then it works out like a mean speed that you're travelling at. So it's not just a case of passing one sensor, it's a calculation derived from several sensors. However, the shape of the pit lane in Monaco means it's really easy to slightly cut the line on the entry. So that means then the time it takes you to pass the first sensor through the second sensor and then the last sensor is too short according to their calculation. And that immediately then pings out a fine because the assumption is that you've gone through all those sensors in too short of a time because you were excessing the speed. Whereas the drivers are able to show that no, they didn't once go over the speed limit. It's the fact that they've drifted over the line on the pit entry. Now, unless we're going to bring in track limits for the pits in Monaco, I don't really know what can be done about this. I think this is a whole mess that the FIA's got to deal with now. And I have a very strong feeling that they're just basically going to turn around and go, oh well. Now, apparently, I have read that all of the drivers were warned about this pre-race. This will have been something that will have been in the notes that they were given before the race, because every driver in every race, in every series, are given specific notes relating to that race before the race that you're supposed to read through and take on board and remember. They're like the race director's instructions, basically. So I think the FIA will say those penalties are staying in place because you were all warned. We told you all. Whether you read it or not is up to you, but we did tell you all that there was a chance of this happening. But yes, I'd imagine for Gasly that's small comfort, because to lose a podium is awful, and to have gone down 4 places like that, and to have celebrated your podium, to think you've won it, to then have it taken away from you, is just such a difficult thing to deal with. So I feel really sorry for Gasly. And now, for a little bit of comic relief, let's talk about my predictions. And when I say let's talk about my predictions, please try and remember that in Canada I did really, really well, because this week I have not done really, really well. In quali, I predicted Norris to take pole. I had high hopes for the McLarens this weekend, as I discussed, and I should know better by now, really, shouldn't I? I had Leclerc taking second, I had Russell in third, I had Piastri in fourth, and Gasly in fifth. So I was wrong on every front there. The nearest I got to anything was obviously Gasly in fifth. It was a little bit my wild card, and he did actually qualify ninth. But yeah, okay, that's a stretch, I know. When it came to the race, because of the lack of overtaking in Monaco, I kind of left them where they were. I had Russell third, Leclerc second, and Norris at the top of the podium, which was all completely wrong. I had Hamilton taking fourth and Piastri taking fifth. Now, Hamilton took second and Piastri took fourth, but Russell finished outside of the points, as you know. Leclerc didn't finish, neither did Norris, so that was absolutely terrible this week. When it came to my hit the mark, I initially picked Ferrari, crossed it out, then picked Alonso, crossed it out. Should have stayed with Alonso, because after I crossed Alonso, I picked Ocon. Now, I actually, to be fair, maybe I shouldn't have crossed it out. I'm kind of half claiming this one as a bit of a victory, because Ocon did finish ninth, and that's not a bad finish for Ocon, is it? I know he likes Monaco. I will caveat that by saying that had so many people not gone out of the race, I don't think he would have finished ninth. I think he benefited from a lot of others' misfortune to take that ninth. But points are points, so I'm kind of taking that one as a bit of a win. And I need to, because we're pull over and park. I said that it would all go wrong for Mercedes this weekend, particularly, and I had to double down on it. I couldn't just leave it at that. I couldn't be a little bit vague and say, I just don't think Mercedes are going to do that well this weekend. And then I could have come back now and said, well, to be fair, Russell had a really bad weekend. No. I doubled down on it. Not only did I say Mercedes would have a rubbish weekend, I said it would be particularly Antonelli, and I didn't even predict him as finishing in the top 5 of the race. So that really is about as bad as it gets, predictions-wise. Probably one of my worst weekends. Who knows what I'm going to predict for Barcelona, but if you're a gambling person, I wouldn't listen to me. Well, you should listen to me in Canada, but don't listen to me any other time, apparently. So to end on a positive, because I always like to end on a positive, I'm going to award my flattering ram for this week And for those of you that are new to the podcast, a flattering ram is where I pick something of the weekend that I think was super wholesome, or somebody went out of their way, or a team did extremely well that wasn't expecting to, or a driver did something and really put the work in, or just had an amazing bit of luck, or did something kind for somebody. You get the gist. Such something that you could pick out from the weekend and go, that made me feel quite good. I was happy to see that. And this week's flattering ram goes to Racing Bulls, because, as we know, Racing Bulls don't always have the best of luck. And to see both of them finishing the points was an absolute joy this weekend, and I'm so happy for them. That is a nice big chunk of points for Racing Bulls to really lift them up that midfield. And despite all the chaos that went on, and all of the craziness, and all of the penalties, and all of the bumping into each other, and the chat on the radio, and this, that and the other, both Lawson and Lindblad kept calm, kept out of trouble, brought those cars home in the points, and of course cherry on a cake, Lindblad did that amazing overtake. So yeah, this week's flattering ram is Racing Bulls. So that concludes this review of the 2026 Monaco Grand Prix. And we don't get long to rest, because this weekend is Barcelona. And I'm looking forward to Barcelona. As you know, bit of a fan of the European leg. And I do think we've seen a lot of change and a lot of things hotting up. Ferrari are definitely on the up. It's going to be so interesting to see how it all plays out in Barcelona. Will Kimi do it again? Will we be looking at another pole and or a win for Kimi Antonelli? Or will George's terrible luck finally take a turn for the better? Or will it be somebody else? Will it be the Ferraris again? Will the McLarens finally actually string together a good weekend for both drivers? Will we see Max doing extremely well again, and maybe this time his car will start? Who knows? All I know is it's going to be really interesting, and I'm really looking forward to it. So please join me on Thursday for my preview of the Barcelona Grand Prix, where I'll make some more predictions. Good luck to me with that. And we'll have a little chat about what to expect, who we think will go well, who we think will struggle. I'll do my usual hit the mark and pull over and park, my usual predictions for qualifying and the race, and we'll see what happens. But until then, have a really great week. Try and get out, guys. Get outside. Mind you, maybe not so much if you're in the UK, because it won't stop raining. But if you live anywhere where the climate is a bit more normal, get outside. Enjoy the weather. Get some fresh air. And then get yourself back inside, ready to watch the race this weekend, because it's going to be a good one. But until then, look after yourselves, and don't forget the cheesy tagline. That Tracks F1 podcast. Track the action. Join the fun. Bye.